So, last Saturday morning, local time, the terrorist group Hamas launched a massive incursion out of the area of Gaza and into southern Israel. And for the last 4 days, that's pretty much been what the world is watching, and us. So I have with me tonight Hetman and Commander Lance McMillian again. Thank you both for being here. It's been quite the week, huh?
It's been one hell of a week.
Very true.
Yeah. So I thought we'd start sort of with, well, I feel like, and we'll probably do something on that a little bit more prepared later. But for now,
We need a whole
it's a thing.
series, like at least 3 episodes to get to the roots of this conflict.
Before we
And
actually,
And that's not even talking about the current situation.
No,
Yes.
that's what I was just going to say. I mean, it's a very tricky subject too. It's not something that,
Yep.
you know,
it opened with a
can be
fairly
approached.
massive rocket barrage Saturday morning, and there is a wall. Well, it's basically a set of fences and walls around Gaza itself that separates Gaza from the rest of Israel. They made a number of breaches in that wall, the Hamas did, and they poured out and basically went absolutely bananas. Additionally, they tried to infiltrate from the sea, which was mostly stopped, and they had
They did air
paragliders.
infiltration. Yeah, I
Yes.
was just going to say they did air infiltration, which is very, I don't know if this is the first time it's been done by irregular forces. That would be something interesting to look into. I don't know if like maybe the Tamil Tigers or some of these other, not state armies have done that.
Irrespective of whether or not it's irrespective of whether or not the is a novel thing, it certainly was novel in this case because the Israeli air defenses were not prepared for it. These are, I'm going to put it up here, a picture of one. These are small gliders with parachutes on them, basically. They're significantly easier to operate than an airplane, but they are still, you have to learn how to fly these things to be able to use them accurately and safely. So for sure, there was a great deal of planning and sophistication that went into this. I think is evident from the outset of the attack.
Yeah.
I've heard something like about 1,000 fighters were involved in this operation.
The highest count I've heard is 1,500.
That's a fairly sizable force. Even though I mean they're attacking different localities, it's still, you can see how they would overwhelm local, like police stations and things like that. A lot of these settlements in Israel do have private security as well, but yeah, and even I think that they even attacked a small military outpost. I did see that. I saw that they had destroyed a Merkava tank as well.
There was footage of the other thing I think that points to that is there was an attack on a military base. There's footage of Hamas fighters moving through Israeli barracks, and then the other thing is there's drone footage of them dropping a tank on the top of a Merkava, which caught a lot of people's eyes on Saturday because they thought that it was something novel that Ukraine was doing instead of a fairly common tactic throughout the Middle East. I believe it's pretty extensively used in Yemen by the Houthi.
It's been used in Yemen and also in Syria and Iraq. ISIS actually was very adept at using drones to drop munitions.
Yes.
So it's not a unique feature of the Ukraine.
Al-Shabaab did his one time too.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's the new.
Al-Shabaab is the
Horn of Africa.
Yeah,
Somalia, Kenya, that area.
Yeah, I've made the argument before, at least in some places, that the United States is going to have to start learning to deal with drones and to deploy them at smaller echelons, like company and platoon levels, just to be able to they're going to be a thing now. Like those tiny little drones are going to be a thing. It's not necessarily something to be surprised by, but like we don't have a full count yet of how much damage was done by the Hamas attack. They're still finding bodies even as we speak, and there's a lot of confusion going on about as to what exactly had happened. It's going to be a while before that's sorted out.
Yes.
As of now, I haven't read any of the news. Have they cleared out all of the like the settlements that were attacked?
All of the settlements,
No.
all the settlements are being cleared room by room still. So we're
Yeah.
in day
Some
3.
there are sites where they know that the Hamas raiders got in, and there's still believed to be a couple of them in those areas.
Oh wow!
So,
So there's still
yeah,
some holdouts.
Yeah.
They basically all scattered to the wind after they got out. And then the other thing that happened during the event itself was a whole bunch of people who were not necessarily Hamas found a hole in the fence in the side of the run through and went around and take pictures and grab guns. The entire situation quickly deteriorated beyond any state of control.
I think two things need to be pointed out. One, the decentralized nature of these attacks, in that this was not, like you see in Ukraine, where everybody driving in one direction to take an objective. This was done so to achieve something like that, for all of those different locations to be hit at roughly the same time, requires an enormous amount of careful planning and rehearsal beforehand. And we know that this was carefully planned and carefully rehearsed before they launched it. I mean, there are pictures of training sites where they have mock villages, and they ran the fighters through there to train them on how to go house to house and kill people.
Yeah, there was preparation work going into this, which makes it all the more troubling that Israel wasn't ready. There's a lot that goes into that particular discussion, I think.
Oh, yeah. I mean, everybody for a long time used to think Israel had the greatest intelligence service on the planet, at least focused on protecting their interests at home. And this is kind of like a combination of Pearl Harbor and 9/11 rolled into one.
I feel like it's like a Tet to like surprise as well.
Yeah.
I think that's actually a really good analogy.
My first impressions of it, when I heard about it right when I was at my cousin's wedding, and I think my initial thoughts were like how did Israel miss this? How did like their intelligence service, how did this escape them? I heard today that the planning was likely done by the communication of this was done like actually like human communication, not through any sort of electronics or anything. That's how they developed this plan.
Yeah, no intercepts.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a certain degree. There's a lot of speculation going around, and I don't really want to engage in that yet because it's really premature to say.
It's too.
What went wrong? There are some very obvious things to point to, that there have been some sharp divides in Israeli society between the military and the government as of the last few months. There was, for example, if everyone remembers back when In Time did the coverage of the protests that basically shut Israel down a few months ago. That was largely considered to be possibly a threat to the military, his ability to respond to situations when reservists said they would not be called up. So like there's possibly an element of that, and that seems to be validated by the fact that today Likud formed a cooperational government with another party, an opposition party, to get the government rolling properly. And I'll be honest, I'm surprised. On Saturday when I did the initial panel, I speculated that we would see a ground invasion into Gaza within the next 2 days, and that simply hasn't materialized. So I'm really surprised at how kind of slow the IDF has been moving to commence that ground invasion. They've obviously been bombing the crap out of Gaza.
I think that they have to carry the operation out very, very carefully, because Hamas has had a lot of time to, set up defenses. They've had years to do this, and the last few ground invasions, I forget when the last one was. I don't know if it was 20.
I think it was 2016, wasn't it? Or maybe 2014.
Might have been 2016, 2014. And there was some pretty heavy fighting there. I think something like 47 Israeli soldiers were killed. Actually, more were killed in this attack than were killed. I think the total death toll, military death toll, might even be coming close to the 2006 war with Hezbollah. But this is going to be a very nasty operation if they go through with a ground campaign. I think that, the Israelis are very adept at urban combat, but they haven't had a task like this in a very, very long time. And they're bombing a lot. I don't want to get into sort of like the,
there are certainly questions that are going to have to be asked about target selection. For example, there was a United Nations compound that was hit today, and a university that was hit earlier yesterday. And it would be very difficult to justify either one of those as targets unless something went very, very wrong. But apparently the IDF is justifying the university as a training center for Hamas engineers, which is a stretch. There is going to be this is going to get into I think part of the contentious portion for me. There are 2 million people who live in the Gaza Strip. Not all of them are Hamas, and they are all suffering at this moment. There's people who are dying who shouldn't be dying. This tragedy that started on Saturday is going to continue to unfold for a very long time.
This is only the beginning for sure.
Well,
I think that this is. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, this gets to one of my key points about all of this is we keep talking about it as a terrorist action. And as I said in the lead-in before we were on air, this is a military operation. It was planned as a military operation. The people were trained in military operation tactics to achieve what they did. It was staged very, as I said earlier, well planned, well coordinated, and we know it had to have been financed, get the equipment that they needed and the training to do that. So, as with any military operation, the first question you need to ask yourself is, what is the enemy's objective? So, what is Hamas trying to achieve with this attack?
Well, as far as I can see, I think they would have had to have anticipated this happening, what's happened in the last 4 days. They would have had to have anticipated that Gaza is going to be attacked and invaded.
Yeah.
There's a certain degree of questions that I was having, and I was having a discussion with someone else, that Hamas might be the dog that caught the car with how successful their attack was. I don't think they were ready for that. I think
that's what I was just going to say too. I don't think that they were expecting this operation to be as successful as it was, and I think that too might have been. I know that obviously this is a military operation, but it is also a terrorist act as well. I mean, the attacks basically
Sure. I'm not saying it was not intended to have terrorist effect. I'm saying rather than this being two bubbas who smuggle a gun onto a plane or something.
For sure, for sure.
This is a military operation, first and foremost. Its effects may be terrorist, but that's irrespective of the fact that it's planned and executed as a military operation. And the key thing you have to say is, why did they do it the way they did it, and what are the goals? I think the goal is precisely what the outcome is being. They wanted a major Israeli incursion into Gaza, and it accomplishes two things. Number one, it exposes the Israeli military once they go into Gaza, which is one of the most densely populated areas on the planet, to urban fighting in which they are not well prepared, and it's a costly operation to execute. That's number one. Number two, if they executed this part of the raid operation to provoke this, think about the years they've had to prepare Gaza for a defense against an Israeli military incursion. We know they have tunneled the entire area of the Gaza so that blockhouses, everything, it's connected underground, so the Israelis have no idea where the enemy's going to pop up. They have no way to really effectively protect supply lines as they go in there. And that, I think, is what's going on, is they want to inflict not only maximum casualties, but it gets them also maximum public exposure. And the people in Gaza are now being essentially forced into the Hamas camp because they're going to react against the Israeli incursion.
Yeah, I think this last part's really important.
Sure.
It is really important because what this ultimately does, the conflict radicalizes people on both sides, in both Israel and in Gaza, and probably to a not significant extent in the camps and in the West Bank. So
for sure,
this furthers the conflict, and I think it's probably important to point out that irrespective of any other theory, there is a degree to which both Hamas and Likud, the Likud party, need the conflict to delegitimize the other. Hamas needs it to delegitimize Israel, and Likud needs it to delegitimize Fatah. So, like, this is... I had this conversation with a number of Israelis I know the day of, and all of them independently said something that I said, that this is probably the best thing that could politically happen to Netanyahu as he's been getting this stranglehold on power. And he's been increasingly dictatorial and authoritarian over the last several months.
That's what I was just going to say too.
This works out wonderfully for him in a really sick and twisted way.
One thing that is very interesting is I don't know if you heard about it, Commander, but the head of Egypt's intelligence actually contacted the Israeli government several weeks ago, warning them about this, that Hamas was planning something big. And these warnings, I guess, were not heeded at all.
I've heard, and I don't want to put too much credence to this yet, because it's, again, early, but I've heard a lot of people talking about that border defense along Gaza was pulled off and put on the West Bank, which, for those not geographically, this is the West Bank, Jerusalem, and all this area here, where it has a lot of settlements.
Effectively the opposite side of the country.
Yes, the other side of the country. And like scale is something we should probably talk about too, because Gaza itself is something like 48 or 50 kilometers long. Okay, yes, I'll get you out in a second. Sorry, the dog wants to go eat the cat food. It's 48. That's 2 million people basically in something half the size of Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people that are exposed to conflict. There's other reports that their hospitals are already overwhelmed after 4 days.
That, and there's a whole issue of the gas and the water being shut off. The critical infrastructure.
Yes, electricity, gas, and water is off in the city, so they're in a pickle.
And Egypt has closed its border with Gaza as well. So all those people are stuck inside that tiny area as it gets shelled and bombed by the Israelis, and presumably eventually can have street house-to-house fighting going on.
My question too is, is there a international relations dimension to this? Is this was this attack done specifically now to undermine the peace process that is going on between Israel and Saudi Arabia?
That may be part of it, but my personal supposition is that this is being done at the behest of the Russians to distract the US and West.
Yeah,
I think
there's a three-way nexus. Yeah, I think there's absolutely convinced there's a three-way nexus here between Iran, the Russians, and Hamas.
It's not a coincidence that Russia launched a limited counteroffensive yesterday.
That's what I was just going to say too. Yeah,
it's not a coincidence. No, for sure. It's also well known that Russia is working with Iran extensively, and that Iran backs Hamas and Hezbollah, who is hesitating up in the border of northern Israel to get involved.
Yep.
Oh, the debate was canceled. Excellent. I was kind of thinking that was going to be cancerous and horrible for everyone involved. Excellent. Sorry. That was just a dumb chat. Yes, so they have turned around and there have been activity. There's been rocket fire coming into northern Israel, as I understand it.
Yeah.
And that's another thing, is Hamas probably has a great deal of rockets stored up. Not that it's like horribly effective. Like you say, Hamas has 10,000 rockets, but Iron Dome gets about 90% of everything fired. So like,
except oddly on the first day, it didn't. It almost hit nothing.
Yeah, that was a little weird. It was actually very weird.
And again, that goes back to the whole supposition, like the Pearl Harbor conspiracy of, did Benny have involvement in making this as big a success as it was?
That's a $1 million question.
I honestly don't think he would have. What I think he did is he had a Trump moment more than anything else, right? What he did is he dismissed people's claims because he viewed them as opposition and should have taken those claims seriously. You saw Donald Trump do that at the beginning of COVID, for example. Like, I think he had a kind of, conservative brain moment more than anything else. Like, that seems to me a lot more likely than Netanyahu secretly allowed an attack of such a massive scale to occur.
No, I agree, but I'm just saying there's something squirrely that went on. For so many coincidences of failures of the previously redoubtable Israeli intelligence, air defense, ground defense, security apparatus, all of that colossally failing at the same time like this. It's just suspicious as all hell. Now, we had our own incident like that, with 9/11. All the indicators were there. People should have picked up on it, but we didn't.
Yeah, there's also kind of like, it has a certain element of, why didn't I see what was going on over my backyard into the other guy's backyard to it.
Yeah.
There's a reason why 9/11 is a watershed moment for Americans, is because it basically ends the 90s.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
And that kind of optimism. It also ushers in a new understanding. And I think that's kind of, if you've been following anything that people have been talking online for this week, it's been a rough week to watch people talk about this. Oh God.
Yeah.
I want to unequivocally state that Palestinians are not universally Hamas any more than the Quds is universally Israel. There's a whole lot of people who are suffering and very upset, and without
And rightfully so.
without going too deep into this, there's an obvious element of why Israelis are upset. And there's a lot of long-standing problems here. Israel isn't Israel. We treat Israel very unique. The circumstance that we tolerate in Israel, and
Yeah.
there is a degree to which I think that contributes to this atmosphere, is that there are people sitting here justifying the Hamas attacks, and that's not right. But at the same time, it's hard to justify what's happened in Gaza even before today.
Of course. Or for example, if you're looking at the situation holistically, like if you're looking even at the West Bank situation with all the settlements and
Yeah, so the settlements
violations.
are a pretty widespread problem, I think.
They are, yeah. The one thing that I should mention though, regarding, Israel and the relationship to its non-Jewish minorities, Israel has a very, very large Arab Muslim population living within, outside of the West Bank and outside of Gaza. And, they're quite successful. They enjoy a lot of pretty much almost all of the same civil rights. I mean, there are some caveats to that, but yeah, it's to, as I stated before, like to get into the origins of this conflict, we would need like a whole series of episodes. It's a very, very complex.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's a challenging situation. A lot of people have felt inclined to speak up, who just remember that Israel is happening today. So
The thing that has, and I'm saying this as someone, I have friends in Israel. I have also relatives living there. Some of them were people who came from Russia to basically. I have my third cousin and her husband. They moved to Israel to basically in protest of the war. Especially difficult week for me with all of this, and I can also state that the images and the stories that I'm hearing just astound me. My the people know that my background is in genocide studies, and what occurred, of course, is not, um, it doesn't at all meet that criteria at all, but it's certainly a major war crime, and it is probably the biggest, the most in terms of the amount of deaths, and it's still, the number is still rising. This is the largest attack against any Jewish community probably since 1948, possibly since the Holocaust, actually, in terms of the amount of death. I'm pretty sure that in the War of Independence, a lot more civilians, because there's a lot more incidents of things like this on both sides, actually. But yeah, this is a really, really, it's been very hard for me. The stories that are coming out of parents being forced to watch their children being killed in front of them, in very gruesome ways that I don't even want to mention on this channel. I've studied the Holocaust in Ukraine for almost a decade now. I've worked with, archives in Ukraine, and I'm hard pressed. I've dealt with a lot of individual incidents, through working with these, archives, through interviewing people, and I'm hard pressed to find something fitting this type of brutality. A lot of the Nazi operations in this former Soviet Union were done very, very carefully. And they were actually, there was almost like a procedural way in which they killed people. Granted, it's a very horrible way in which they did it, but, the kind of barbarity, like the almost, real intimate violence that you see. I mean, it's a feature certainly of the Holocaust, as a big event, but this is something even rare in that case. So it's been very hard for me, coming from that background and hearing these stories. I've been very angry about it too. So
No, I get that. But the same token, I just, it's been a rough. I checked our last 3 shows. This will be the 4th in a row that we're doing current events programming. Well done, us, History Channel. Uh, there's been a lot of. We've been basically doing a lot of public interest stuff lately. That's not nice, not fun. And just as horrifying as I found everything coming out of southern Israel, the situation in Gaza is just as bad.
it's been, as
It's
bad, and
been bad.
it's gonna get worse. My fear, honestly, is although the IDF is a relatively disciplined force, these type of attacks, well, I mean, yeah, I'm not
That's
gonna
and
stretch that,
March.
but
That's a pretty heavy load for disciplined to cold. There are a lot of problems with the IDF.
of course, but yeah, let me finish. So when my fear is that you could see retaliatory attacks, especially not even necessarily from the IDF, but from settlers, for example, in the West Bank. I think there already have been some,
There are.
killings that have taken place.
Yeah.
So kind of, pogroms, if you will, against the
I
Palestinian populations in the West Bank by the
I
settlers, that could happen.
I hate that word,
Um,
but at the same time, it's it feels like a really loaded word to put in front of something being done by a Jewish state. But at the same time, it's also appropriate. Um,
Pogrom, it's a very hard word to translate. It essentially means like mob violence. A lot of people associate it, of course, like just what you said it, they associate it with Jewish history. But the literal meaning of the word in Russian essentially means like, group violence or mob violence. It's hard to translate it.
yeah, it is.
Um
However,
Yeah, because it's state-sponsored mob violence,
yes, it is.
sanctioned perhaps.
The problem is the degree to which the settlements are state sponsored is again another tricky thing to talk about, I think, but it's still like ultimately protected by the state, um, and expanded by the state. The thing about the pogrom though is it's traditionally, at least for most people who are aware of the word, associated with violence towards Jewish populations.
yeah,
Um,
that's
it and
generally how people associate that word, specifically with the late 19th century and then early 20th century violence against Jews in the Russian Empire.
yeah, Fiddler on the Roof type plot.
Yeah.
And that makes
The Russian Civil War is a bit far from Fiddler on the Roof, but that's usually when I think of pogroms. That's my first where I go to.
Actually, the pogroms predate that.
Yeah, pogroms run throughout Eastern European history pretty long.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah.
Again, I think Eastern European history interaction with Jewish people is where most people typically associate it if they know about it at all. And there is, I think, there's a deep and dark irony to all of this, in that Israel exists as it does because functionally, in most societies, Jewish people felt unwanted. And Palestine, as it exists for the same reason. Like after Israel won its war of independence, Palestinians weren't given access to the countries as citizens. They've been kept in camps to this day. Some of them looking out over the border to where they used to live, generationally.
Of course.
Yeah. But I would argue it goes before then. I think you have to go back as far as, the Versailles Conference, where a bunch of Europeans, prior to the war ending, arbitrarily drew some lines on a map and said, you get this, I get this. Who cares about the locals?
Yeah, and the other problem that comes in is that the actual partition itself, that the UN put forward, the brand spanking new UN in 48-49, was silly. It was never going to work. If that had gone into effect, we'd have different wars, but the same players.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
For audience members who might not have come in for that particular bit, the partition itself is fairly. I'm sorry, the door's open. The partition itself is fairly circuitous, so it divides the territory and it doesn't give either side contiguous territory. And like it's hard to see this working out well at the end for anyone, because the peace process that started in Oslo is functionally dead.
Yeah, it is.
And it got a pretty hefty nail driven through its heart when Donald Trump took the embassy and stuck it in Jerusalem.
Yeah,
Yeah. Donald Trump managed to mess up the Middle East much worse than any American president prior to him.
I'd say he fucked up more than the Middle East.
Yes, but it's impressive that he managed to screw up the Middle East even more than George Bush.
Okay, well, valid point.
Yeah, once he, it was just so gratuitous taking the embassy and putting it in Jerusalem.
Money was passed under tables for that to happen.
I'm sure. Although that seems like the kind of thing that what's his face? Now I can't remember his name when I need it.
Kushner?
No. Ambassador to the UN, Republican.
Yeah. I know who you're talking. I can't think of the name either.
Yeah. Damn it. Bolton. John Bolton. That's something the kind of thing that John Bolton would want. Yeah, he was the NSA or the NSC National Security Advisor for a time too. Jesus, horribly unqualified for that. Anyway, yeah, that sounds like just the kind of thing that John Bolton would absolutely love.
Oh yeah.
My question now is, obviously, I mean, we don't know how this is going to play out, but I don't see any other way, that this is going to definitely launching a major ground assault into Gaza. And they're going to, I mean, Hamas is partially an idea, and it's very hard to destroy ideas. But, as an organization, as a political organization, and, its military wing for sure, are not going to be able to survive this. I doubt they're going to be able, like, even if the fighting is very vicious, which it most likely will be, I don't think that they're going to prevail with this. So to me, it's almost like, they might have had some grand ambitions with this, but ultimately this is like taking a gun to your head and pulling the trigger.
Let's hold on to that thought. I want to come back to that, but we have a question from the audience from CF Beauty for Commander McMillian. The United States Navy has a battle group and ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Are we prepared for a full conflict if there's a rogue attack on a ship?
That's a good question.
I did not know we had a full unit. I didn't think we had a whole full carrier group in the whole Strait of Hormuz. It's very little.
They did. I think it's the Gerald R. Ford battle group moved in. I know they started moving the day the raid took place, and I believe they're already in the Med, probably in Eastern Med by now. Can they protect shipping? It depends on how you define protect and how you define shipping. And I'm not trying to be facetious here. If you're trying to protect large bulk carriers, tankers, cargo ships, container ships, that kind of stuff, there aren't that many of them. And if you carefully organize which ones you're going to protect because of how they're flagged, so you can probably safely say that Indonesian ships can go through because Hamas is unlikely to hit them. But you want to protect, say, German or Dutch or Norwegian ships. Yeah, all that they could probably do. But if you're going to extend that coverage to every ship in the region, and I'm not just talking the large ships, I'm talking every bubba in a sailboat. No, that's probably outside their real capabilities.
Yeah, and if the question's about Iran, I think Iran probably has not forgotten how the 70s and 80s went for them in exchange with the United States Navy.
Yeah.
And I suspect that documentary on Operation Praying Mantis.
Yes.
Yeah. Rather one-sided.
Attack on U.S. ships. I am almost confident. Perfectly. I almost feel confident.
Wasn't the worst damage to the worst damage to the U.S. Navy in that operation was actually done accidentally by like an Iraqi,
Yep.
it was a friendly fire.
Yep. So
yeah, I'm sure there are threats to our ships, but our ships are really good at shooting things down.
I have to wonder if the real reason the carrier group was moved in was to keep a certain Russian client state / ally from getting involved.
That's what I was just
I think so.
Going to mention. I think it's to prevent. It's a deterrent for Iran getting involved in.
No, not Iran. Not Iran.
Syria.
Syria.
Yeah.
Syria seems to, for the moment, be fighting Kurds. They joined Turkey today in bombing the Kurds.
Oh yeah, everybody hates the Kurds. That's the latest hobby in the Middle East. That's a great segue into my question that I would ask is there a nexus between Erdogan and his brand of Muslim fundamentalism that is the foundation of his power in Turkey and any of this that's going on? Or is he just being an opportunist?
I had to guess it would be the latter, but that's a good question.
Yeah,
because there has been some speculation by people in the know that he has ambitions to become, the caliph or sultan of the new, really re-emerged Ottoman Empire.
Sort of like an Ottoman Empire of influence, like a sphere of.
The political people that get him and his party into office, and a lot of them are the fundamentalists in Turkey.
The question
prior to Erdogan, Turkey was a very secular state, and the army actually had, it's codified into the Turkish constitution. The army has a responsibility to overthrow the civilian government if it takes changes too far beyond what the secularist roots of Kemal's Turkish Republic were. And Erdogan has purged the Turkish military completely of the secularist officers. So it would not, I think, be beyond stretching your imagination that this has some Turkish involvement.
That would be really bad for us. There's a degree to which I can see it, but then there's a degree to which that me wonders, like, the root of Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood, and Erdogan he started cutting ties from them around the time of the Arab Spring. So, like, it's hard to say. Like, it would be really tricky to be able to go, "Yep, that's the thing." But it works out very well.
Thing. I'm just saying
it works out very well for Erdogan too, in a way, because he benefits from instability in Syria, and he benefits even more from instability in Israel.
Yep.
And Lebanon has been functionally, a flan in the cupboard, slowly collapsing ever since their civil war. So,
yeah. Chaos is the great friend of authoritarians.
Yes, absolutely. Like I was asked to explain the Lebanese civil war on Saturday. I'm like, no one actually knows. Everyone who thinks they do is lying.
Okay, explain Hegelianism for people, but do it only in 5 minutes. Keep it brief, because I've got other things to do.
And remember to stand upside down at the same time.
Why are we friends from Shayna Caldwell? Why are we friends with Turkey? I'm going to leave this to you, Daedalus.
My same answer that I've been saying for the last 3 weeks. We are friends with Turkey because of the Bosphorus Strait. They're basically the kid in high school who has the car that we have to put up with. Because we need to be able to control that strait to keep Russia in the Black Sea. And that is why we have been friends with Turkey for years, despite the fact that Turkey is not great friends with us. They're kind of dicks.
We're also, to some extent, friends with the Turks, because then we can keep the Turks and the Greeks from tearing each other's throats out.
Yes.
I feel like
they have tried to do that several times in the past.
Oh, Titan, President Sunday
years.
Server doesn't understand.
I feel like that will be the first, that's bound to happen, and that will be the first instance of 2 NATO states going to war with each other.
Well, as I said, they've tried to do it several times.
Yeah.
I was there one time when the Sixth Fleet actually got in the way and said, "Don't you dare."
Wow.
Well, I'm just putting that area up on the maps. Look at all those islands.
God, yes.
Oh my God.
And that's primarily any conflict between Greece and Turkey will be a naval one.
Yeah.
Well,
they also do share a common land border.
But it's all mountains. All mountain. Which you don't see on this particular map, but it's tricky to get across. Not really.
That portion of the border is actually fairly flat. It does get mountainous a little further in.
Oh, there is some. Yeah, there is some mountain. Yeah, in the back of Greece. Yes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But that area there is, on Greek. Yeah, but it's relatively open terrain, and you could send troops down it easily.
Yeah, no, Titan, absolutely.
Never guess where the bulk of the 2 countries' armies are positioned.
Right there, looking at one another, waving.
Yeah.
That I did not know, but that's, obvious. I guess that's definitely like where they would put them.
It's not like they need to be anywhere else for Greece or Turkey, for that matter. Actually, Turkey might have some other concerns down south, but like the bulk of their army can be stationed up in the north, on that side of the isthmus and be fine. Turkey's actually a fairly big country when you get down to it.
You know, obviously they want to move some of it to the Armenian border so they can.
Well, they've got so many interests that they have to watch out for. They have to watch the Syrian border. They have to be over in eastern Turkey to watch the Kurds, and they've been fighting a war with the Kurds for forever. And now they have to watch the Caucasus border pretty closely because of all the stuff that's going on there. So, poking the Greek, I don't know what animal would, not bear, but poking the Greeks is not a wise thing for them to do at this juncture. They already have.
Probably be a ram, if anything, a Greek ram.
That's
that would make sense. I was just gonna say though, don't the Turks have out of I think any other NATO force besides maybe England or France, they actually have one of the most developed militaries and a very robust military industry that has developed over the last
they are
decades.
building their own fifth generation fighter.
I mean, granted, I know that the Greek military is pretty well armed. They have a decent
but they build very little of their own stuff. They buy.
That's what I was just gonna say. I mean, in a confrontation, I mean, on paper, wouldn't the advantage favor the Turks quite a bit?
Bigger population, yeah.
Yes.
Arguably better resource base.
But one of the things I would point out is to not underestimate the little guy. A lesson we learned in Ukraine pretty substantially. The other thing I think is just talking about Greece in general is trivia bit. They were made the villains in season 4 of The Last Ship on TNT, which I suspect you enjoyed watching, Commander.
I haven't seen it, but it would be interesting.
They do a decent job. There's some what are you doing moments about naval warfare they do, but they do a pretty decent job throughout the length of the show. Don't many European countries have large military interests, primary export oriented? Some European countries do. A lot of them.
The three big ones are obviously Britain, France, and Germany.
Yes.
Most of the others don't have huge. Well, I need to add Sweden into that because they're now a NATO member. They also have a fairly robust defense industry, but Turkey has developed theirs to the point where I would contend they're kind of bordering on being equal with the Swedes.
Yeah, Turkey is.
I think that's a good. That's definitely a good assessment.
Turkey occupies a very awkward relationship with Europe, where they are part of it, but not. Like they tend to assume that they're going to be self-reliant in the case of something going down.
Yeah, and another part of it is when Turkey was denied EU membership, Erdogan took that personally.
Yes.
And relationships between Europe and the West in general and Turkey deteriorated noticeably after that happened.
And he's also the principal block to Sweden's ascension to NATO, or permanent ascension to NATO. Yep. And he benefits from this, I think. I think that's something to point out. But he doesn't really benefit unless Hezbollah gets involved.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole area is a giant powder keg with a lit fuse.
And I've seen a lot of spectacularly bad ideas coming out of people lately, such as invading Iran
Oh, that would be a horrible mess.
Don't
take all of Iraq. We're going to take about 6 months. The estimates for taking Iran are between 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, Iran is a fortress.
Yeah.
It's a big country too, you know, just geographically
it's
speaking.
closer in size to Ukraine than it is to Iraq. Iraq is fairly small when you get down to it. And I think it's probably worth noting, if we're going to talk about that in 2003, when we invaded Iraq, we just invaded a very little portion of Iraq, ultimately.
Yeah.
Like you could say nominally that we invaded a third of the country, but even that's generous. We basically drove straight into 2 cities.
Yeah. We knew it was a decapitation war. As long as we could take the Ba'ath Party and Saddam out, the war was over. Or at least what we thought was going to be over.
So we
oh no, there'll never be a popular uprising against us. We're loved in there.
So we went in with a force roughly the same size, about 20,000 less than Russia invades Ukraine with. And if Hetman will remember well, as I'm like, before Ukraine is getting invaded, I'm like, I don't think the Russians have enough troops. Ergo, I don't think they're going to invade because they have to know this won't work. I should have told the Russians that, but that's beside the point.
You know, like with Iran too, I could certainly see a similar scenario of actually, I don't think it would be. I think it would be hardly similar to the Iraq war, but I know that a large portion of the urban population definitely are hostile to the regime. The countryside, I'm not sure. I believe actually that was the basis, like the support base of the Ayatollah and the
it's rural populations are by nature conservative. Urban populations are by nature fairly liberal.
And you lose that urban population really quick in counterinsurgency warfare, because that's where the fighting happens. So like it's not like who is happy with us now is not going to be who would be happy with us after an invasion or 6 months into an occupation. You basically throw everything out the window of pre-war demographics at that point. It's just not really sustainable. I think for the moment, parking a carrier battle group off the coast of Israel is probably the most we should do at this point, and sending one to the straight up from Hormuz. Just let them do it. If Israel needs to bomb something in Iran, like a factory or a thing, they're perfectly capable.
And this is where my career specialty would have been involved, is if we have to do what's called a non-combatant evacuation. So if the U.S. government determines that the situation in Israel is so bad that we need to forcibly extract all our people, I mean, we wouldn't invade Israel. We'd do it with the cooperation of the Israeli government, but we would probably send in Marines and secure an area to evacuate our people. And having the carrier there to support that kind of an operation is a critical part of that.
I can't help but notice that it would be shorter. Just a thought.
Wow. I never thought of such a thing.
Much closer.
Jerusalem, too, especially that embassy, it could become a flashpoint as this deteriorates.
So far, it's been relatively quiet.
Which actually is kind of surprising if you think about it.
Yeah, but it's still early.
Yeah, it's still early.
we're still in the early hours of this.
Yeah, I hate saying it, but I don't think this is anything good is gonna come out of this. I'm really pessimistic.
I pretty legitimately think we're looking at a third intifada.
I think something worse than that.
Well, the other thing I think you need to add into that equation is shortly after this began to occur, the Jordanians said that they would allow the U.S. to bring aircraft into Jordan to offload military supplies destined for Israel. And within 24 hours, the Palestinian refugee camps erupted in violence. And a lot of people don't realize how many Palestinian refugees are living in Jordan.
There's at least a million.
Yeah.
Black September. Just read up on that, and you'll know exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about.
There's at least a million, and there's a good number in Lebanon and some in Egypt.
Yep.
Syria, there were quite a bit in Syria too.
If anyone was in Syria, they should have gotten out 10 years ago.
That's what I was just.
Actually, the last person in Syria just needs to turn out the lights. Jesus.
Yeah.
That's about it.
It'll probably be a
Russian.
Russian who's the last person in Syria.
Very happy that he's not in Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm wondering, with the carrier group, where it is, if, this will, like the fear, of course, as I mentioned before, is the, of course, other actors getting involved. And I'm wondering if the carrier group will be a sufficient deterrent to that.
Well, it's the Gerald R. Ford, I think, right? It's the new one.
Yeah.
Correct. They'll certainly give whoever's going to try something pause before they do.
Yeah, it's the new carrier and something on the order of like 5 destroyers, so it's pretty hefty. And obviously, there's probably a submarine floating around there too.
Yeah.
Quiet as you please. Looking for somebody who's just stupid enough to get close. I don't think there'll be another USS Liberty incident or anything like that.
No.
There's quite a bit
one of our subscribers, CF Beauty, just stated that Emmanuel USA is working on a humanitarian corridor, probably for women, children, and the elderly.
Yes, Emmanuel.
I had actually heard about this too. That they're okay.
Not an organization. Another user. But that's yes, they are working on a corridor. I am skeptical that that'll work out well. Just for that very reason, like, how do you figure out about men of fighting ages?
Well, an equally important part is, would Hamas let them leave? I think Hamas wants them there, both as human shields and so that throughout the Muslim world, they can hold up these pictures of murdered Palestinians and say, look how evil these people are.
Yeah, I think what they wanted to do, like the objective that Hamas had, was to turn Gaza into something like Hue City or Grozny. Which it already looks strikingly like Grozny. Like the remodeling campaign is well underway.
I wouldn't go that far yet. I have seen a lot of precision strikes, but not like the type of Russian style carpet bombing that you were.
But the areas they have it are like blocks leveled.
Oh, the neighborhoods, yeah, yes. they're bad, yeah, for sure.
The areas that haven't hit are blocks leveled. Like you just see people standing in rubble. It's
of course something. It's bad. Yeah, I'm not trying to minimize the damage that's been done, but they're not. It'd be a mistake to say that they are conducting a Russian style bombing campaign or artillery assault. But that can all change.
That will probably change once ground forces get stalled, and they will get stalled when they go in.
Yeah,
because Hamas can just sit in there and they can fight for some time. They can ride out this bombing. They have to go in to fight them, and that's when it's traditionally gotten bad.
Yep. Yeah.
That's what it's traditionally.
Question from somebody: Palestinians in West Bank, the same as Palestinians Gaza? Yes.
The
As are the
Palestinians
ones in Lebanon.
are
all the same.
one
opinion.
people. However, the effective government of Gaza is Hamas. There's a very, very nasty relationship between Netanyahu and Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, which ostensibly controls the West Bank. But Israel
also
Israel is pretty much physically in control of the West Bank.
Yeah. There's also an inter-Palestinian conflict between Hamas and then
what used to be the PLO.
Yeah, Fatah, the party Fatah. That's functionally gone on since 2006. To this day, they've had occasional flare-ups, but they have functionally been not friends for quite some time. So, politically speaking, Gaza could almost be regarded as a separate entity from the West Bank. Functionally, for the people living there who are not Israeli, no Israelis live in Gaza. A lot of settlements are on the West Bank. And there are a lot of Palestinian enclaves in the West Bank. Functionally, they are one people who are theoretically supposed to be under the control of Fatah. But that, again, gets really deep into the weeds of the last 30 years of the region's history.
Yeah, theoretically.
Yeah,
so
everything you say.
The other thing I think it's worth... Go ahead.
Yeah, the other thing I can really say is there's a lot of qualifiers that goes into this discussion.
Oh, absolutely. I think another thing that needs to be pointed out, a lot of people don't realize, I mean, there's a sense that Arabs, be they Syrian or Jordanian or Egyptian or what have you, are all kind of, friends and they work together, etc.
Oh, that's such an erroneous...
Oh, well, it's erroneous, but even if you wanted to just take it at its most superficial level, I was going to say yes, and the but is important, is that there is a perceived hierarchy of who's important or more important than others in the Arab hierarchy. And at the absolute bottom of the pack, below even people who come from, Indonesia or Malaysia or something, the absolute bottom of the pack in terms of their level of trust and prestige are the Palestinians.
Yes.
Yeah, they haven't been treated too kindly by the Arab world.
By their own I mean, I lived in Egypt, I lived in Bahrain, I've been in Saudi Arabia, seen, how things are there. They are treated like dirt by the Arabs.
Yeah, it gets into what I said.
If you want to try to unify, but if you want to try to unify the Arabs, all you have to do is say, "Oh, the mosque in Jerusalem is being attacked," and everybody jumps up. But they don't really care about the Palestinians.
If they cared about them, they would be a lot more accommodating and hospitable towards them, and they're far from that. I believe that the Jordanians actually, I don't know if I might be wrong on this, but one of the biggest massacres carried out against Palestinians was done by
the Jordanians.
Yeah, by the Jordanians.
It was part of Black September.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Yeah, and
the PNA is the Palestinian National Authority, and is ostensibly the government of the State of Palestine. The State of Palestine is a contentious organization to begin with. It is not universally recognized. It's much more of a limbo than any other state might be. They ostensibly control territory in the West Bank and Gaza, but they don't really control that territory in any meaningful sense. Anytime they try to assert authority, Israel puts them back in their place pretty quick. The Palestinian National Authority is they're doing their best. They're a single mom working 2 jobs, doing their best.
Yeah, good point.
Why are they seen so negatively? The Palestinians were after the so Israel. Quick bit. When Israel was founded in 1948, they all get together. I think it's September 14th, and they make a pact to farm Israel, and they say we've made a country. The next day, basically everyone around them declares war on them. Egypt, Transjordan, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria. They all declare war on Israel and join the Palestinians in fighting them. So for about 9 months, they fight. A whole bunch of terrible atrocities happen on both sides. And Israel is sitting on basically all of the territory they were promised by the United Nations, plus about half of the territory that they promised the Palestinians. At that point, as part of the ceasefire, all the Arab nations took the Palestinians and said, "You are not our citizens. We do not accept you. You can get to, quote unquote, air quotes, retain the hold on your land and identity, and you can sit here in refugee camps until we get the situation resolved," fully expecting that they were going to take out Israel in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
It kept getting bumped back down on the to-do list. Then we
not from lack of trying.
Yes, then we get to 67, and then they have another quick
56.
War. Yeah, they have another quick war in which Israel basically takes all the rest of the land that was promised to Palestine. And that's essentially where we sit today.
Yep.
There we go. That was the best short Israeli history I can do. It's what were we talking about? Sunnis and Shias. Yeah, Lebanon is non-functional as a country anymore, pretty much since the Civil War.
Yeah.
One has to mention too we talk about terrible events in Palestinian history. The Sabra and Shatila massacres that occurred, and Israel actually had a pretty big part in that on the sidelines.
Yeah, it's worth ultimately saying before I get harangued on Twitter tomorrow that there are no good guys in this no good guys in this conflict.
Hell no.
Everyone has been pretty much horrific to one another. However, the people who suffer the most horrific, I think, consistently, is probably the average Palestinian in a camp or in the West Bank or in Gaza who isn't involved in a Hamas or Hezbollah or anything like that, and who is, just trying to live life. They effectively get caught in the middle of this. The conditions, and President Sunday went over this the other night a little bit about the conditions in the West Bank and how the Israeli military polices the Palestinian enclaves. It's not a life that most Americans would take sitting down.
Oh, hell no.
I'm going to say something that will get me harangued on Twitter tomorrow. I think the Israelis' treatment of the Palestinians in the West Bank particularly makes segregation look like a West Hampton clam bake.
Pretty accurate statement, all things considered.
Yes. It has been compared to the South African apartheid. And it's really hard to argue against that and not be silly. So I choose not to. Which kind of brings
well,
me to
I mean, the argument that they put, the argument they put forth is because there's so much threat, they have to be harsh about it. You can get that same kind of response from
someone talking about
so
Nelson
many police.
Mandela 70 years ago.
Well, hell, you can get it in this country when you're talking about BLM.
True. Civil rights.
It's the same. Yeah.
Civil. It basically comes down to civil rights again, and
Exactly.
something we've been talking about ridiculously often on this channel, I think. And like this, I think if you want to come up with an overarching theme for human history, which I don't like to do because it gets reductive, but I think a lot of the push of human history is the battle for civil rights overall. Like that I feel somewhat comfortable with. Is people trying to expand civil rights, and that's ultimately what this comes down to. And like you look at the Palestinians, and you and I were talking about this the other night, Hetman, of how many of them seem so incredibly hostile towards Israel, and how many Israelis are hostile towards Palestinians. And you get why. I understand why, and I understand why.
A large portion of Israeli secular society, I don't know how they feel now after this, but
they seem pissed.
Overwhelmingly, a lot of them seek peace. They want an end to this. They are tired of it.
The religious, the hyper-conservative factions don't. And
it depends on which religious faction. I mean, there's anti-Zionist, ultra-Orthodox Jews. I mean, there are there's a pretty large sect of them in New York, and actually some that are living in. I believe there are some that are, ironically, even though they want a dismantling of the Israeli state. There are some of those, that same sect living in Jerusalem, I believe. But yeah, in general, yeah, you have this sort of religious far right group in Israel
that functionally controls
a group that is actually demographically growing, and a group that poses a very large threat to Israeli democracy, and a group that a person like Netanyahu very, very much relies on, as a support base.
Yeah.
So
like, I get.
Yeah, I mean,
but ultimately, I don't think there's a solution to this, but to incorporate the Palestinians into Israel as a single state, and give them full rights.
Yeah, that's a fear of a lot of this
the
group,
far
though,
right.
that it will
Yes.
be the end. It'll be the end. It'll be the end of the Israeli state.
Because it does not make sense to me to expect the Israelis not to be able to coexist with their neighbors equally the way that we have to try to do here. And we don't always succeed at that, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's a lot. I mean, that's a two-state solution's an issue, and this solution is also very, very much fraught with
it's difficult, absolutely,
problems.
But all a two-state solution does is outline the future players in the next war. And you say you take them both, you take everybody, you sit them down, and you say, you are going to turn this into a workable state, or we're giving Jerusalem back to the Egyptians. And that's that. Because you cannot have a situation where two groups of people want the same thing and don't get it and try to coexist that way.
Of all the existing conflicts, I feel like that this is the one that is going to endure perhaps well past our lifetimes.
Well, yeah.
I really believe that. It's just such a contentious problem.
Yeah, I don't think my solution will be met with much
I view
enthusiasm.
my fear, my honest fear is that, Israel is a post-genocidal state. It's a state that largely emerged out of the ashes of the Holocaust. Generally, in theory and in statements, they say that they're beyond that. But, I mean, I watched a very interesting documentary about 1948 and about largely the aftermath of 1948, of the victory of the Jewish settlers and Israelis and the ethnic cleansing that took place. And there was an Auschwitz survivor, and he was so horrified by what was happening that after that occurred, he said, I could never call myself, like, identify with this project, with this state, and with Zionism ever again because of what he witnessed. He was so appalled by it, so horribly affected. And I mean, what is done is done. And I'm definitely of the belief that there should be a, Israel should exist, but there's a lot of problems that come with.
I don't think anyone begrudges the concept of Israel, of a Jewish state, of a Jewish people having a place.
Yeah.
The particular issue is where that place ended up being. And like I get the impulse. I do to want to have that state in the wake of one of the most horrific tragedies to ever happen to any people ever. On top of a history of tinier, similar events. I get why they believe that, but there is also, like, Jewish communities came, for example, to the United States and thrived. There's going to be success for that faith, irrespective of. No, a federative state has not been proposed as a solution. There's going to be success for the Jewish people, irrespective of the success of Israel, or whether Israel remains a solely Jewish state. So they came out of that. There is a certain degree to which I have to say, I need Israel to be magnanimous to solve this problem. No, sweet as the guitar, a federative state would be an absolutely useful solution. It would probably have been a pretty decent solution for Iraq, too. We, as in NATO powers, Western European powers, need to stop drawing borders. We're bad at it. We keep including people who don't get along very well. But for example, like Sudan and South Sudan is a quote-unquote two-state solution that only worked because they didn't necessarily want the same things. And Sudan now has a little Russian problem.
Sudan is also really big. I mean, you're dealing with, like, a country that, the farthest end, like, you could say it stretches from Chicago to Denver. That's how large of a country it is. And certainly, like, I mean, that's how big it was before the division. And South Sudan isn't. It's big too, but, like, there's enough space. I mean, obviously, it didn't emerge overnight, and there was a lot of bloodshed. I mean, absolutely horrid bloodshed. But you're dealing with a lot smaller of a land area in regards to Israel, or Israel, Palestine, whatever.
Palm Dan, I'm reminded of that perennial complaint by Hearts of Iron players about borders after peace treaties. I haven't looked at the new build yet, but I'm sure the peace treaties have bonked again. So there's that. I had to sit down and do that. Probably not tomorrow, though. At any rate, we're coming up. Yeah, we're coming up at about the hour and a half mark. So again, I don't want to keep anyone. So I just want to put this in for any closing remarks both of you have. Starting with you, Commander.
I think that what people should be looking at over the course of the next week or so to see how it plays out is whether Israel decides it's going to actually do a ground drive into Gaza, or they're simply going to isolate it entirely and effectively try to besiege Hamas into submission. I think that's going to be an important element of what goes on in this. Because if they try to go in, I think they're actually playing to Hamas's strengths. But
Absolutely.
I suspect that political exigency demands that they do something. Benny can't survive if he doesn't do something dramatic.
I would second both those remarks. Part of me thinks that a state of, like, if they go the siege route, that's going to be even worse in some ways for the civilian population, unless they set
Oh
up
yeah,
some sort of humanitarian corridor.
yeah. The tragic realities. I don't think either side gives a damn what happens to the civilian population.
Yeah, I would second that as well.
Well, that segues perfectly into my closing statement. Is there is a great number of people who have been horrifically taken and are going to be horrifically killed in the coming weeks and days. Uh, it's going to be a bad situation. This is going to be one of those things that gets put into history books. So,
yep, and not in a good way.
As for us and what we will do going forward, Sunday's content has been rearranged so Zanzi can watch the finals for a rugby match, which I guess is some form of tougher football that they do over in Europe. So I will be doing that show, I think, later on in the month, the 22nd. We will be back Monday for sure. I'm still waiting on President Sunday for the schedule for panel stuff. And if something else comes up, we will try to arrange further updates on Israel. With that, I want to thank everybody tonight for coming out. Thank you for liking the stream. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe and have a good evening.
Please